So welcome to the London Photo Festival podcast. As part of our Art and Business of You series with Beth Taubner, the final element of our podcast is to review the work of two photographers via video link. Conducting a portfolio via video is a first for three of us, but we are trying this new approach given the unusual circumstances we currently find ourselves in. Welcome back to the show, Beth.
Hi, Emma. I'm so happy to be here as always. And this is a great culmination for the series that we've been doing because we've taken our audience through a very clear kind of progressive program in understanding who they are and how to approach their work, the meaning of their work, and how to market their work. So it's very exciting. And I do come from a background where I've done quite a lot of portfolio reviewing. Of course, Emma is the, what should I call you, the co-founder of the London Photo Festival, and is very experienced in the exhibition world and the curatorial world in that area. And, you know, in my background, I do work a lot with visual artists and brands. But in the course of working with visual artists over the years, where we do work a lot on the meaning of their work, their attributes, and how to apply that to their shooting, their conception, story conception, their shooting, their editing. I've reviewed quite a lot for other organizations, including the Palm Springs Photo Festival, which is not just based in Palm Springs, it's in Palm Springs in New York. It's one of the premier review venues for photographers, for the AOP in London, the photography show, the Art Directors Club in New York, and for the two most important photo organizations in the US, APA and ASMP. So I'm excited to be reviewing for Tommaso today.
Yeah, and welcome, Tommaso Carrara. It's really lovely for you to be able to join us today.
Thank you. Same here.
So just for those listening on Podbean and iTunes, we'll be displaying the images that we're reviewing on our YouTube channel, blog and Facebook. And the 30-minute review is going to consist of two parts. So for part one, we'll find out a little bit more about you, Tommaso, and then in part two, Beth and I will review some of the images that you've submitted. So over to you. I was wondering if you could just tell us a little bit about yourself and your background.
Yeah. So I work in IT, so I've been doing this for, sorry?
Roll back. Let's talk about your family background and where you're from. Let's start from the beginning.
Sure. So yeah, come from Italy, moved to the UK 12 years ago. My mom used to be a teacher. My father was a doctor. I also have a sister. She works in HR. She lives in Paris. And we kind of moved together to the UK almost 12 years ago. And she moved to Paris 5 years ago. So I'm still in the UK. And the main reason why I moved to the UK, basically because of my job. So I was in IT, I'm still in IT. And at that time in Italy, it wasn't, let's say, best situation in terms of jobs, and I decided to move, also improving my English and other things here and there. So in terms of photography, this is something very recent to me. I've started almost 2 years ago, and it was quite, I wouldn't say a coincidence, but I decided to buy myself a proper camera. I never took any picture apart from using my phone or very small point and shoot cameras. So I felt like I had some time to spend, and I wanted to kind of use it differently from what I've done before, and that's how it started. So
I'd like to back up a little bit, because this is how I always like to start a review, is so that I have a context for understanding a little bit more about where you come from. So where did you grow up in Italy?
It was a very small town. I mean, small town, let's say medium-sized town, 30,000 people there. It's in Tuscany, not far from Florence, by the coast though.
So when you were growing up, were you growing up in an environment where people were talking about and experiencing, a relationship with culture and the history of your amazing country?
Yes, I mean, as I said, mom used to be a teacher, so there were kind of discussions around culture, especially about movies back home, because both my parents used to like movies a lot
Yeah.
and cinemas. But other than that, it wasn't such an environment in terms of arts or any other form of art. I wouldn't say so.
So what made you go into IT?
So I did start studying psychology when I was at the university, but halfway I decided it wasn't for me. And then the reason why I went to IT is basically because I've always liked play with computers, and not only play with computers, also using computers a bit differently. That was back in 2000, 2005. So I kind of learned myself how to use computers in a more professional way, doing some system administration, networking, and all those kind of things. So went through some, I did study myself, and then I found a very first job in IT when I was around 25 years old, and that was in Florence because I was living in Florence for the university.
Sounds like heaven.
Yeah.
Yeah.
With parents. What part of yourself do you feel you're using when you're doing your IT work? What would you say are the traits that you're using?
I'd say probably the more pragmatic part of me, the more scientific, if there is one, is that's surely the one I use in IT more.
It's also all about these interconnected elements, isn't it? Because it's all about systems.
Yes, probably not as creative, although that I wouldn't say that there's no such creativity in the job I do, because I'm not a programmer, but I do have to write programs from time to time, and in order to write programs, you do have to be creative sometimes. So surely there's a little bit of creativity, but not that much.
Well, I feel like we have to be mindful of not using the word creativity too in a too narrow perspective, because a chef is creative, and a person who is coming up with a new food idea is creative. Creativity is a very, very broad impulse in most people. So I think as an attribute, that is something we kind of take off the table because it's a given. But I'm interested in the idea that there's a scientific quality in your mind, because we can talk about that when we get to the work.
Mm.
So if we were to ask you 3 sentences where you could talk about your work and then talk about your goals, maybe in 3, 4, 5 sentences about how you see your work, what are the attributes of your work, if you have thought about it in those terms?
Right. So first, I'd say what I try to do and what I'm attracted to is probably candid photography. So whatever is candid, I'm attracted to it. So probably something that which can be seen on all my pictures, on all my photos. Uh, at the same time, I I do also try to make an image pleasing to the eye, because I do like it when it's pleasing. And
Can I stop you there? What does that mean, pleasing
Mm.
to the eye? Because there's a
uh,
wide range of things that could apply to.
I'd say nice to look at. I'd say that it's a pleasure looking at, uh,
So
and kind
it's
of makes you wonder.
wonder.
Okay.
That's probably more about the kind of storytelling side of things, but those are probably two things I keep trying, to make my images about.
Okay, that's great. And what are your goals? What are your goals for this, what we're doing with you here today?
Yeah, I mean, probably, there's many things out there in terms of socials, but at the end of the day, I think it's very important to find a kind of an integrity and know who I am from a photography perspective. And I think that's what takes most of the time, right? I mean, it is quite an effort for for a photographer, especially myself. I've just started now to find an identity. So probably an honest review and critique from you, that would be much appreciated.
We won't leave you crying. Don't worry.
No, definitely
Hope so.
not. You mentioned, sorry, as I say, you mentioned that you bought a decent camera, then you started to take photographs. There must have been some elements before that you decided you wanted to do photography. Could you explain those?
Yeah. So in terms of, in terms of taking picture, making a picture, making photographs, that's something I haven't done before at all. However, in photography itself is probably one of the most interesting forms of art for me. So if I were to go to an exhibition, it was probably about the photography exhibition. So I've always liked like beautiful photographs and photography in general, but I've never been involved with that much. So that's probably the reason why for instance, I didn't buy a camera to make videos, because I do like cinema, but I was more interested in making images.
I
Don't know if that answers your question.
Now, what are your influences?
So as I said, when I started, I basically I had to kind of study a little bit about regular exposures and everything. I mean, how to make an exposure properly, how rules for compositions, and as well as going through some of the the great photographers. So I do like quite a lot Saul Later, Winogrand, and obviously Henri Cartier-Bresson, and those are probably, as well as Alex Webb. Those are.
I would like to again back up a little bit, because I'm curious to know what your influences are that are not photographic. Like all of us have other kinds of influences. Sometimes it's a specific place that we travel to and it's very informed. Like I remember going to Tuscany when I was 21 years old, and the smell of the trees. When I smell that smell anywhere, it, it takes me back. It's a very strong visceral response that I have. And when I was a child and my mother took me to the Museum of Modern Art on a regular basis, I would wait till we came to the Matisse room. And his red room is in the Museum of Modern Art. And that has influenced me all of my life visually. So I'm not saying, so it can be from anything. And I'm curious to know, because photographers tend to look to other photographers, but maybe you were influenced by a movie that you saw or a place that your parents took you. So what might that be?
So probably, I do like cinema as well. So probably, movies from, like gangster movies from, from the US. Probably those are like Once Upon a Time in America. Those kind of movies, I do like kind of a cinematic feel to the images.
Right. Right. So like Scarface, that crazy movie,
Yeah.
Al Pacino. Right. Okay, that's great. So
Right.
shall we move on to the
Yeah,
visuals?
absolutely. Let's share the screen. Okay, just make sure you can both see it.
Yes.
Yes.
Right, let's move down to the first image, which was this one.
So this is kind of an amazing image to me, because it's so painterly and mysterious. And my first experience of looking at it is that I don't know exactly what's going on. It's not literal. And what it established is that one thing we talked about a lot, Emma and I talked about a lot as we went through your work, is what's happening at the edge of the frame. That I notice that you like to activate the edge of the frame in one way or another, and it's frequently the frame on the left-hand side. But in this case, this red stripe is very intentional, I'm assuming, and it anchors this area of kind of impressionistic imagery and the refraction of the light. And I really like it. I feel that it takes me somewhere that's not very literal. And I think it was a good setup for the work to come.
Mm. Yeah, I think every time you look at it, you notice something different. Like now, I've only just noticed that there's a handprint on the actual on the glass, which makes it even more mysterious.
Yes, I didn't notice that, Emma. Yes, also that how the dirt on the window refracts the light, and there's almost these bars of color at the beginning, at the top, the red, and then the black, and then the yellow, and then the white. It's very structured, while at the same time not being literal, and that to me is something worth exploring. You know, what does that mean to you? Why is it that? What led you to take this? Now, one thing I want to say to you at this point in our session is let's not talk about anything from a technical perspective, right? Because the technical is there to support your point of view. And as I said in our last review, photographers tend to lead with the technical. They want to tell you what they accomplished and how they accomplished it technically. But for the viewer, that doesn't matter. The viewer is only interested in the meaning and viscerally and emotionally how they can connect, or what is implied in the image that they can then interpret. So
when you talked about being candid, and one of the questions I wanted to ask you was whether you have an idea in your head before you go out to shoot, or whether you came across this and saw the shot and
that you found it. One thing I noted that you said is you make photographs, you're not taking photographs. You started by saying taking, and then you changed it to making. So from my point of view, making is about intentionality. So that question, Emma's question, is an important question.
Yeah, I think some language barrier, but yes, I do tend to say make photographs because although I tend to be candid most of the time, and I'd say 90% of the times I go out and to make photographs, I do not have any idea of what I'm going to photograph. So it really depends on what's going on. However, there's a little bit of intentionality in the sense that if I do see a nice background, or I do come across an interesting scene, I do work out the scene and I wait for the right subject to enter the frame. Just classic fishing. So but yeah, something I do tend to do is just to go out and see what's happening. Really.
So one goal I would like us to have by the end of our review today is to take the word interesting out of your vocabulary, because it's not a descriptive word. It's not what I would describe as a call to action word. You know, when I'm working on this with my own clients or I'm doing reviews, I want you to get the language as pointed as possible. And that, you know, we're going to help you with that today. And then that's going to become the leader in how you start to find your photographs and make your photographs and edit your photographs. So it's important.
Find your identity.
Exactly. So let's move on to the next.
Should we go to the next one?
Yep.
Look at that left hand. It's so exciting. It's so dynamic. It's almost so primitive looking against this kind of smooth railing, and then this powerful, what can almost be an ominous kind of shadow. You know, we have no idea where we are, except Emma will talk a little bit about the man at the top of
Yeah.
of the staircase.
Well, yeah, I mean, the lines are very strong in this, aren't they? And the staircase railing leads you all the way up to the top of this image. But right at the top, and I don't know if you noticed this, but there's a little poster with a man walking on it, which almost sort of mirrors the shadow of the guy walking up the steps.
Was that your intention?
Intention to include the poster? No. I've only realized while editing or while back home, I said, oh, you know what? I mean, I'm not gonna take it out of the frame at all because it kind of makes sense. There's a kind of juxtaposition with the shadow, so I'm gonna keep it there.
In a way, it anchors the photograph because it's a moment of reality in a place that has so many dimensions. There's the stairs. There's this, you know, the light refracted background behind this looming figure. There's what's going on the left-hand side, and then the bars of black. It's such a complex photograph visually that this little figure at the top really gives us a place to land in the photograph. And so this is a great lesson in editing because you didn't edit it out. Somehow you knew that it reinforced the story in the photograph, which is great.
And also you mentioned that cinema and film were part of your background and part of your influences. And this is very film noir, very sort of 39 steps Hitchcock, with, as you say, with that sort of slightly ominous sort of character. I mean, you're not sure if he's ominous or whether what he's going to reach at the top of the stairs, if that, you know, what's waiting for him up there.
This is something that Emma and I talked about when we were preparing for the review and selecting your work, is that it did have this cinematic quality. So this key word, we're giving you this key word that you've already mentioned, that is really important. Part of it is, you know, what I find is the work has such an incredible sense of mystery, is that we don't really know what's happening. We don't know who the person is. The person is not described, the person is inferred. You know what I mean by inference? It's Tommaso, you know what I mean by inferred?
Yeah, I get it.
It's not literal. And so is an important thread in the images that we decided to discuss with you. And I'm glad that we're starting with this one, because this is like a PowerPoint in the work. I don't mean PowerPoint when we're, you know, now that's part of our Microsoft Word programs. You know, I'm saying it's a PowerPoint, it's a power picture. So,
yeah, in fact, I mean, the name of this picture is Alfred.
Oh, really?
Alfred Hitchcock. Yeah, it's named after Alfred.
There you go.
Got it. We got it. How amazing.
Right, we're done. Our work here is done.
Now we can leave.
Yeah, it creates a lot of tension.
Yes.
It's very powerful.
Very good.
Okay, should we move on to the next one?
This image, I find the light, the luminosity, and what I call, the notes that I wrote is how the light, there's always something that degrades the light. The light is not sharp, it's diffused and degraded. So even the quality of the glass, it feels, even however it is, if it's been etched or I don't know what it is, but it doesn't matter. The experience that I'm having is similar in the prior image, where the light, and in the first one, in all cases, the light, it has been degraded so that we don't focus on it, but it's a very, very strong element in the work. And in terms of the vocabulary of photography, you know, light is one of the tools that we have to tell the story. So again, we have another undefined figure, and another element that happens is always there's a gesture or an implied gesture. And that is another thing that we noticed that was consistent in the best images. And so this is another another attribute, which is about gesture. So we're starting to drill down into what the attributes are, and it does go back to this idea of it being cinematic, because this could be a frame from a film.
Mm.
And I would say to be mindful of this idea about it being candid. I don't think that's the right description. I would not use that word. Candid. I think what you mean is that you're out in the world and you're finding the picture, but the picture is very studied. In other words, it's gestural, but candid means something else to me.
Mm.
Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I get that.
Yeah,
probably the emphasis is not on the candid side of things, is more on the gesture and other things. That's probably...
Because a big discussion we had was about this idea of street photography, which I was very resistant to, but something that Emma might want to talk about.
Yeah, I wondered if you saw yourself as a street photographer.
Yeah, the definition of street photography is so wide that I mean, by looking at what other street photographers do, I think my work is quite different from them. However, I probably keep calling myself keep saying I am street photography because it's out in the public and it's kind of not staged, and and taken in the streets. However, street photography does not necessarily have to be taken in the streets, but I think that's one of those things I do need some help with as well.
I would be myself. I would not use it. Well, I'm very resistant to categories, which anyone who works with me knows. You know that because I'm coming from the States, we tend to be less category oriented. Whereas I found from working in the UK that people want a category. I feel you're a fine art photographer, and that is the category that I would put you in. And that's very broad, because the idea of working from you're seeking out very, very consistent kind of structures. I don't mean the graphic structure, but as you're looking, it's not casual. Like, we'll talk about the ones that feel a bit more casual, which from my point of view are less successful. Like, I understand the relationship between these first three images. It's one eye. I get it. It has the components that are used in different ways that can expand the story, the project, your collection, your exhibition, whatever it's going to be, which is a combination of this mystery, gesture, something having to do with an activated figure, the degraded quality of the light, the incredible structure of the image that you find and that you make. And for me, that's a very, very strong point of view. It's a jumping off point that can take you to many different places in the work. But I myself would be very resistant to the idea of thinking of you as a street photographer. As I say, Emma and I discussed this. If you need a category, just put yourself in the fine art category, because that's what you're doing. You have a strong point of view, and I'm very excited by it. I think for someone who's been shooting for 2 years, I'm blown away by your work. It's great.
Yeah.
You know, it's the intentionality of it. You must exercise patience in the work. Patience to wait, patience to see, so that you can create this world. That's what you're doing. You are creating a world.
Yeah. And also, Beth, you mentioned that Tommaso has this element that he includes on the left-hand side of his images, and you have it here in this one. I don't know if you can see that there's some lovely little lights coming through on the side, which just give it a little bit more kind of punch, I think. Yes,
again, activation of the frame.
Yeah.
I think that's what we're talking about. The images are not still.
Okay.
It's either there's a gesture or an implied gesture.
So let's move. Just to let you know, we've got about 7 minutes left on this call, so let's run through to the next one.
again, this is a more straightforward image for me. I, I find the left side of the frame to be most exciting. I don't know what it is. I have no idea what's going on there. I don't know where you are. Um, it seems part of the series, but maybe I'm a little bit less seduced by it. But I can see that it comes from the same artist.
Yeah, we weren't also quite sure what he was doing, whether he was dancing.
I was just covering his face from the light.
Oh, I see. Okay, because we thought you might have been dancing or.
Right.
It was just covering.
Yes. So that again talks to this mysterious attribute.
Yes.
Yeah. So that is a wonderful element about it. But I feel like it needs, like his foot is a little cut off in the bottom. I don't know what, that little right-hand corner feels a little messy. It's not quite as pointed, as careful.
Yeah, it's one of my first images, I would say.
Okay.
In fact, yeah.
Good to know.
Yeah.
Okay. Look at that left side of that frame.
Yeah. Yes. And also, yeah, but I thought this reminded me of Cartier-Bresson's image where the guy is jumping over the puddle.
The puddle. To me, it feels like a still from a movie. I feel like this could have come out of Moonlight or something where we're in kind of a tough urban landscape. There's a toughness to it. Again, the same elements. While there's architectural elements, you use them in the service of the story, and that's when the work is really working, unlike the image we looked at before this, because the textures, the shadow, the thrusting of the image that takes us to a dynamic point. I'm excited to see that because it feels like it, whereas the other images don't have as much propulsion, this has that quality. So I can see your IT background, your systems thinking. I see that in these pictures, but I feel that you're using them to tell a story. And if you ever find yourself where you're just too seduced by the graphic structure of the building or the place, you'll know that you're not on track.
Yeah, very strong lines that are bringing you deeper and deeper into the image.
And so I'm cautioning you to say not to get hung up on where you say, oh, well, this is an interesting building. Let's use just the structure of the building, because it has to be in service of the attributes and the story that you're telling. Here we wanted to talk about why you're starting to work in color. What made you make this decision here?
I normally shoot in color, and I did like the blue sky, the white and red flag, the almost blue cyan color cap. From the guy sitting, and that I just like the overall tonality of the image. But first of all, I was attracted by the couple on sitting on the bench. That's what really attracted me, and then I did wait for something a bit more exciting to happen, such as seagulls and someone raising the stairs.
Activation, because that's the attribute. If you have to activate the frame, that's what you wait for, right? That's what you're waiting for in your patient way so that you can make the picture. But Susan, I'm curious about what you just said. So you're shooting in color, and then the other images you converted to black and white.
The very first one. I think a couple of images before. The guy covering his face. At that time, as I said, it was still at the very, very beginning. So I was kind of shooting in color, and some of those images I converted in black and white, which is clearly not something we should do. However, the one of the guy with the structure and the building, I did on purpose take the image in black and white. So that's why it's so contrasty.
Was this an earlier picture? This picture here?
No, this one is probably 2 months old.
Okay.
I took it in Brighton, and that was the intention, to take the image in color.
For me, again, there's some mystery going on in this image, and I do like that you have activated. There's a lot of movement in the image. There's the flag. There is, I don't know what's going on in the center there, or that orange kind of thing coming up towards the seagull.
It's a flag. Yeah. So it's another flag. Yeah.
I mean, what are your thoughts about this image, Emma?
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be good to see it in black and white. I think it might be a bit more powerful, actually, because the folds are interesting on the back of the guy's back.
It's the guy in the right-hand frame that makes the picture work.
Well, yeah.
His curiosity and how kind of indistinct he is, and he pulls us into the image. But there are other images that we've looked at thus far. Even though there's the activation in the frame, there's more of a place to go.
So shall we move on to the next image, which is the Brighton Pier, I think?
Oh, that's actually Cliveden.
Oh.
So why don't you talk a bit about this image, Emma?
I wanted to know what the center of interest was for you in this image.
So the center of image was so basically I was just walking there, and I found this guy with his child, and I did like the idea of basically going into his point of view, and basically his perspective, and by looking at the pier, and although is out of focus, but the idea is actually to create a little bit of mystery behind the subject. So that what really did draw me the attention.
I wondered if you perhaps played with the depth of field a little bit, you would get a bit of a deeper.
Yeah, I did focus onto the pier, and because I was quite close.
Yeah.
The depth. Yeah, I was probably like an F5-6, something like that.
Yes. In this image, that she felt that this figure in the foreground could have been a little bit smaller. Like, had you have the frames where he was less bulky on the right-hand side?
There were other frames, but in other frames, unfortunately, it was positioned in the side of the frame, in a part of the frame where I didn't really like it to be. It was more on the left, and or otherwise on the center. So I did like the idea of having him on the right-hand side, because it really draws the attention to. But yes, I would have loved if it was kind of, if I was a little bit kind of further.
Yeah, I think if you had
from him,
like an F11 or something, you would have created a little bit more sort of mood with a deeper depth of field.
So this is a good point in talking about editing, because sometimes I find, again, this is a big issue when I'm working with my own clients one-on-one. They come in to the work with me editing emotionally. They have a relationship to the image, or a relationship to the place, or a relationship to the experience that can be both positive and negative. So sometimes you can get emotionally attached because you're trying to solve a problem, which maybe you haven't solved before, or something like that. And I feel in this image, this is not exactly a successful image. It's less successful than the earlier images that we looked at. And it may be an idea that's worth exploring again, but is not resolved in this image. So we cannot be emotionally attached to the image because you had a goal, but in general doesn't have the strength and the precision, I would say, of your other images.
Yeah. Okay, so this is the next one, which is the guy at the bus stop.
Fascinating image. Really feels very surreal. Do you know the photographer Jerry Yulesman, who was a very early conceptual black and white photographer who would cut his negatives apart and then put them back together, and there would be a mirroring, just like here, negative, positive. Do you know his work?
Nope.
So this is someone, it's Uelsman. Jerry is his first name. You might find his work very interesting, or compelling, I might say. So this is such a surreal image. It's so complex. It's like a target into the center of the frame, and yet there's so much dynamic energy around it. And again, we have something either activating or blocking us at the edge of the frame. And that's what's going on the right-hand side of the frame. So that there's still something where it could have been cropped differently, but this is consistent with your work, is that there is some piece of information that we have to relate to on the edge of the frame. When you talk, I have more things to say, but Emma was compelled by this image.
Yeah, and it slightly reminds me actually of the first image we looked at through the train window, because I've only just noticed something now. Like I noticed the handprint on that first one. I've just noticed that his thumb is on the left-hand side is just slightly above the bollard, and it looks like he's sort of pressing it down. And I also I had to look at this several times in order to kind of work out the content of it, and I then realized that there was a bus coming, and he was trying to flag the bus down. But there were several layers, I think, to this image, which makes it successful.
Yes, I agree. This image in color, for me, I can accept it. In other words, it's always the language that I use. I can accept it. I can digest it. I'm not saying it's good or bad, but I get it. You know, that the color, because there's, you know, this pale blue and then this kind of tan, and then there's the green of the tree and the yellow, the red, the gray, the black, the blue in the distance. It has, yet somehow it all works harmoniously for me, is because of this centerpiece where it's almost like an arrow into the picture. You know, where his hands is at the bottom, and then we see the point at the top pointing us forward. And so it's quite an active image. It has many of the same elements that we talked about in the other images. It's very mysterious. There's a lot of layers. In some cases in your images, there's a tremendous amount of information. There's a gesture. There's an activation of the frame. This is a much more complicated image, and it starts to go into something that feels surreal. And for that reason, if you were going to include this in a body of work where we wanted to understand what your work is about, you would need to explore this idea further, because this kind of surrealistic quality doesn't really exist in the other imagery. The other images are very dense and they tell a complex story, but this is something else yet again.
Yeah.
So if this is something that you're interested in exploring, I would encourage you to do another 9 or 10 images that relate to the density and surrealistic quality of this image, because it's moving the work in another direction. And it's not to say that the first part of the presentation we looked at is not equally valid, because it is, because that part of the work feels very, very strong, very powerful to me.
Yeah. He also looks as if he's hovering, like he hasn't got any feet, which I think also makes it mysterious.
Yeah, it's filled with arrows for sure.
Right, let's move on. I think this is the last one in the
Right.
in the presentation.
We were a bit troubled by this image. It doesn't feel consistent with the rest of the work.
This is very street photography to me.
Yeah, that you waited for him to get into the center of that grating over the door, and for these, riders to be coming in from the left and right. I don't know what the story is here. It doesn't feel as narrative as the other images. For me, it feels, I've seen it many, many times before. The blocks of color, the lines in the street.
I think it's also the first one of your images where we actually see people's faces. I think all the other ones you don't see hardly any faces at all.
Feels a little bit like a stock image to me, and that's not a compliment. In other words, someone wants man running on an urban environment, and then they take this picture. They will use this in their brochure or something. It's if going back to our earlier conversation about your category, if your category is a fine art category which has ideas behind it, I don't get that feeling from this image, and that's why I wanted to include it, because it doesn't have the same level of success as some of your other images, where it feels like you're really developing a body of work. And is there anything more you want to say about this image, Emma?
I think we discussed that we might wanted to see this in black and white. That might have had more of a presence, because it's got some interesting lines coming through, hasn't it? With the bike, with the markings on the road, and then on the shutters.
But what's the story? I don't know the story in this image. It feels like a graphic. It's an image that's based on a graphic solution, and that is not sufficient. That's not big enough. Again, this may be something that you are happy to resolve from a graphic standpoint, but that has to be peeled away in the editing process. I would want to encourage you to go back to this recording when we're done today and pull out all of the attributes that we've used consistently to talk about the work, because that has to become the basis for how you're thinking about your imagery, how you are taking your images, and how you are editing your images. And it doesn't mean that they have to all be the same, because you can see already that there's a big vocabulary that you'll be able to develop with these attributes. And so the next part of your job is to be able to expand out from the black and white ominous figure, which you've already done quite successfully, and maybe find that in different situations. Maybe it continues in the urban landscape, maybe it's in the suburban landscape, or maybe it's in the countryside. I don't know where that is the beginning of a serious body of work for you to continue to work on, from my point of view. The density, the complexity, the cinematic quality. I feel like you could spend the next couple of years, really working on that body of work. Not to say that if you're interested in the surrealistic part that you couldn't be working on that, but I'd like to see you dig in. I think it's not a moment now. When I was in college and I studied with this incredible photographer at university, whose work was in the Museum of Modern Art and so on. And he would always say that for young photographers, and don't take this the wrong way, but he would say that in the first 2 years, it's garbage in, garbage out. You just have to put a lot of stuff into kind of the basket, and then you have to put it out there, and then you really start to make the space for your point of view. In your case, you already have a point of view, but you have to be mindful of the thing that my professor said, right? So that this last image doesn't fulfill your point of view. So I would like you to really work on really tunneling into the different applications and ways that you can explore those attributes. Because you don't feel like such a young photographer to me. You feel like a person who's really got something going on, which I find quite exciting.
Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, so before we wrap up, Tomas, I just wondered if you had any questions for us at the end.
Yeah, I was gonna actually ask for some recommendations, but Beth has already basically covered those. And yes, I was actually going to ask if there was a particular project you would recommend me doing, and that's probably back to the fine art kind of thing. So
yeah, I say got it. Feel encouraged.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you're doing a good job.
You are indeed. Yeah, it's been a real pleasure to review your work. So thank you very much for joining us, and thank you, Beth, for joining us as well.
Great. We'll be interested to see how your work develops.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you very much, both of you.
Thank you. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye. Bye-bye.